Donald Rumsfeld was the head of the Department of Defense from 2001 to 2006, and the man who was to be contacted specifically in the event of a terrorist hijacking, according to the DoD's own guidelines, which were mysteriously revised just months prior to 9/11. However, as we exposed in a previous documentary, Rumsfeld was missing in action on this, the most important day of his career. So if we are to accept at face value that the head of the US military was so out of the loop that morning that he was not even aware of the hijacked jet flying over Washington until it hit the very building that he was sitting in, then just who was in charge of emergency operations that morning?
A call to the traveling president, urgent conversations with top aides, and then a burst through the door.
My agent all of a sudden materialized beside me and said, "Sir, we have to leave now." And grabbed me and propelled me out of my office and down the hall into the underground shelter in the White House.
In White House shorthand, it is the POC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center.
Oh, I didn't know that it existed till I was actually down there. And I'm not sure I could find my way back there to this day.
A Cold War relic deep underground, and the Vice President's base of operations on the first day of a new war.
In the 9/11 Commission's final report, Cheney's time of arrival at the PEOC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, is given as 9:58 a.m. This is directly contradicted, however, by testimony given before the 9/11 Commission by Norman Mineta, who was the Secretary of Transportation at the time. Norman Mineta testified that Cheney was already at the PEOC at 9:20 a.m. when he arrived, but the 9/11 Commission report lists the time of Cheney's arrival as 9:58. Where did the 9/11 Commission get this number, and why is this discrepancy important? If we are to believe the 9/11 Commission report, Cheney didn't arrive until after Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. If Mineta is right, however, Cheney was commanding the Emergency Operations Center as the plane was bearing down on the heart of the American capital, the most heavily defended airspace in the world. This is not a trivial point. Nor is it merely a case of Norman Mineta being confused about the timing of events that day. In fact, he remembers quite clearly exactly what Cheney was doing as the plane approached.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, "Do the orders still stand?" And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?"
A moment's contemplation reveals the magnitude of what we have just heard. Not only was Cheney in the POC before Flight 77 hit, he told an obviously nervous aide that the orders still stood and then listened as the plane approached and then hit the Pentagon, the most heavily defended building in the world. Did we just hear confirmation that there was indeed a stand-down order that morning? That is, an order to, in effect, let the plane hit the Pentagon. As the job of creating an informed public has been abdicated by the controlled corporate media, the job of following up with Mr. Mineta about his bombshell information has fallen to the public itself. So far, We Are Change, a citizen activist group known for asking the questions that the controlled corporate media just won't ask, has been the only journalist group to follow up with Mineta about his testimony.
My main concern is that in your testimony, you stated that Vice President Dick Cheney came into the POEC office at 9:20 when you arrived, and he was already there. He's gone in front of Meet the Press, and he said that he was there at 9:38. Yet the 9/11 Commission report puts him there at 9:58 that morning.
9:58?
Yeah, I don't know if you got a chance to read it, but it puts him half an hour later. So I don't mean to ask a rhetorical question, but to the best of your recollection, was Vice President Dick Cheney already there at
absolutely.
When you arrived there.
Yeah, I might have been mistaken on the 9:25, but he was already there. But it wasn't 10.
It was a 9:58. Yeah, that puts him 38 minutes later, which does not make sense to us at all.
No, I don't know how that comes about.
So, and I mean, it goes against your testimony, and it goes against his own testimony. I mean, the press, where he said he was there at 9:38, that's a full 38 minutes. So, to the best of your recollection, he was already there.
Oh, absolutely.
Why has the corporate-controlled media never followed up with either Cheney or Mineta about this discrepancy, key to our understanding of what happened on that day? Why did the 9/11 Commission report list the time of Cheney's arrival at the PEOC as 9:58 a.m.? And can Cheney himself ever be trusted to set the record straight for the American people?
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
The inevitable question now becomes, if Rumsfeld was missing in action, and Cheney was sitting in the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, listening to Flight 77 approaching and then hitting the Pentagon, what was the Commander-in-Chief doing on that day?